Well, I thought it would be time to do a bit of a quick live, seeing as I haven't been on for a couple of weeks, not on lives anyway. I've been working hard in the background, haven't I? Getting some videos out. So I hope you've enjoyed my recent videos as the History Chap. So we had the Battle of Bossenden Wood, British Redcoats versus the self-proclaimed Messiah in the county of Kent, right at the very beginning of Queen Victoria's reign, 1838. And then this week, of course, went across the Atlantic, and we were talking about the Brits and the Irish fighting at the Battle of the Alamo, or, 1 in 8 of the defenders at Alamo were actually born in the British Isles. And their story is not particularly well known. And so I thought I'd tell that this week. So that's my latest video too. So hello and welcome to those of you who are joining me maybe for the first time. Hello to all of you who are regulars on my show and supporters. Hey, and his dad James is straight in there. Thank you very much indeed from Rotterdam. Whoa, thank you very much. So I thought rather than waffling around, and you know me, I can waffle, I thought I'd actually dive straight in to some of the events that happened in British history this week. Just give you a rundown. So this is those little snippets that you might be thinking, Chris, I really wish you'd do that one in more detail as like a proper video. Or indeed, you can just, you can impress your friends at the pub tonight by saying, "Oh, don't you know that?" And maybe it'll even inspire you to do some of your own research or do some visits or something as well. Okay, so hello there, the Scottish Atlantic. Hello Merlin. Hello John Sadler. Hello David Kelsey. Oh, thank you very much, David, about the Alamo. I found it fascinating actually researching that one. And of course, it has let the cat out of the bag now. I've had loads of people commenting and writing into me saying, "Hey, what about the British at the Little Bighorn?" Actually, there weren't as many, but there are one or two links. So the Little Bighorn, yeah, might come and do that one as well at some stage if you're interested in that one. Neil Smith, lovely to see you up in Scotland. Thank you very much. Neil, you reckon there were 66 Brits with Custer at the Little Bighorn? Oh, okay. Maybe there's a bigger story there than I thought. I was under the impression that there weren't as many as there were at the Alamo. So there you go. Thomas Gonzalez, lovely to see you in Colorado. And Simon Noble, how are you? I'm all right. I hope you are as well. So let me just pull up some notes here so we can whiz through and talk about some of the events that happened in British history this week. Okay. So I want to go right back into Dark Ages England to start us off. We're going to run chronologic through the week, okay? Sunday the 12th through to Saturday the 18th, okay? So where are we going to kick off? Back in the Dark Ages England, 633 AD. 633 AD, which is over 1400 years ago. The Battle of Hadfield Chase in Northumbria. And I've referred to that one in the past, actually, referred to it in both my video about Penda, the last great pagan king of England. And several people came back to me on that one and said, oh, he wasn't the last pagan king of England. There was a king on the Isle of Wight. And several of you went back and said, I think in the title it says the last great pagan king, and the Isle of Wight never had that accolade in English history. Also mentioned it in the story of Raedwald, the man behind the mask at the Sutton Hoo dig. So yeah, there you go. So where are we at? So that one kicked us off, Battle of Hadfield Chase, and maybe I'll come back and do that one in a bit more detail at some stage, because I know a lot of you like that whole Dark Ages growth of both England and indeed the formation of Scotland as well at this period. But that's sort of running into 1066 and the changeover. Anyway, let's move on. Still on the 12th of October, let's move past 1066 into medieval England. At 12th of October, 1189, Richard the Lionheart, Richard I of England, the Lionheart, left England on crusade. Whipped up a whole sort of, popular feeling, let's all go, or even if they weren't actually people weren't going with him, there was a sort of a general sort of like, I suppose you call it English pride, English nationalist, and Christian pride, which fundamentally resulted in pogroms against many of the Jewish settlements in Britain at the time, in places like Bury St Edmunds, and Lincoln, and York as well. 12th of October, funny enough, just a few years later, 1216, King John. King John, he of Magna Carta fame. He'd had a bad day at the office in 1215, had to sign Magna Carta. His barons forced him to sign this Magna Carta, really clipping his wings, clipping the power of the executive in England. He tried to renege on that very quickly, and so the barons rose in rebellion again. And it was during this rebellion on the 12th of October, 1216, he was trying to make his way from what's now called the town of King's Lynn. It's actually called Lynn at the time, in Norfolk, over to Lincolnshire. And if you look at a direct line, we can go around the coastline. But in those days, there's an area called the Wash in England. It's that little bit, if you look at the map of England, you look at East Anglia over there, there's that little bit that comes into East Anglia, the Wash. And in those days, it was quicksands with with some more stable sand around it as well. So for those of you who know, say, Morecambe Bay in Lancashire, very similar setup. And if you knew your way across the Wash, it was a fantastic shortcut from Norfolk to Lincolnshire. And so King John was going from Norfolk to Lincolnshire. He actually had a wagon train full of the crown jewels, and the tide came in. They actually had to gallop off. The tide came in very quickly, and they had to leave behind the crown jewels, which were lost to the sea. So the crown jewels of England back in 1216 were lost, which means that all the crown jewels that we have subsequently in England don't date from pre that time. In fact, actually, most of the current crown jewels in England actually come from after Oliver Cromwell's time, because he melted most of them down. So anyway, so King John, the man who was forced to sign the Magna Carta, within a year, he had lost the crown jewels as well. And you wonder why there's never been a King John of England since. There you go. I'll come back to some of the chat in a moment. I just wanted to give you a little bit of, because I know some of you come on, you want to hear the information, not just chit chat. So let me keep moving. 12th of October, 1915. We're up into the 20th century there, from medieval in First World War. Edith Cavell, Nurse Edith Cavell, is executed by the Germans, became a sort of a major PR disaster for the Germans. She was a nurse, a British nurse. She's based in Brussels, capital of Belgium. Brussels was occupied by the Germans in the First World War. Edith Cavell stayed behind. So, everyone knew she was a British nurse working in Belgium, which would have been dodgy enough when it's being occupied by the Germans. More dodgy was that Edith Cavell was helping Allied soldiers escape from captivity, or they were being brought into a hospital, for instance, and she was managing to ferret them out. Eventually, the Germans cottoned on, and they executed her for working against the German occupation. But it was a PR disaster. Probably of all the German PR disasters in the First World War, the execution of a female nurse and indeed the sinking of the Lusitania were two of those ones where the Germans really screwed it up from a PR perspective. There you go. I'm just going to give this one. The 12th of October, 1957, UK general release at the cinema of Bridge on the River Kwai. So those of you who love that film, it's been around since then, 1957, UK general release. Going to do another day, and then I'll pop over onto the chat, okay? So 13th of October, 1397, Dick Whittington was elected Lord Mayor of London. So for those of you who've been to pantomimes and heard of Dick Whittington with his little cat, and he leaves London, he went to London because he believed the streets were all paved with gold, and obviously it wasn't quite like that. So he left London, and as he left London, he heard the Bow Bells and the bells of London chiming, "Turn back, Dick Whittington, thrice Lord Mayor of London." Great pantomime sort of stuff. Well, there was a real Dick Whittington, and indeed he was mayor 3 times of London. Whether he ever had a cat is another matter, but Dick Whittington, a real character. There we go. From 1397, medieval England time. And staying in 2 years later, 1399, Henry IV is crowned King of England. He had usurped the throne from his cousin, Richard II, and Henry IV is the first of the House of Lancaster. He's a Plantagenet, so it's the Plantagenet dynasty, but this is where we're starting to create the divisions in the Plantagenet family that were to lead to the Wars of the Roses. But Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, is crowned King Henry IV on 13th of October, 1399. For my American viewers out there, 13th of October, 1812, the War of 1812, the Battle of Queenston Heights. So you can jot that one down. And we've got to throw this one in, haven't we? 14th of October, 1066, the Battle of Hastings. One of the seminal battles in English history, certainly. And you could argue, well, ultimately, it had the ripple effect. Certainly went into Wales and Scotland. With the Normans in England, it ended up in Ireland as well. And you could argue that the Norman influence on England sort of led to, well, everything that's happened since in many respects. So I'll talk a little bit about the Battle of Hastings in a moment, but let me just come back and say hello to all of you. And by means, throw your questions in the chat, answer people's questions as well, because I'm sort of ploughing through my little diary of events here for you. Just jumping in there, just unfortunately, I just saw your comment, his dad James, about the Black Prince on a Dark Night. Woo. Devet, thank you very much indeed. Nice to see you as well. Okay, Mike Hill is adding a vote for the Brits at the Little Bighorn. A lot of folk in the past have always said, actually the Battle of Isandlwana in the Zulu War. Hey, had to get the Zulu War in there somewhere, didn't I? But loads of people say, it's for a lot of my American viewers are saying, God, this has got a lot of similarities with Custer and Custer's maybe arrogance at the Little Bighorn. I think there were some significant differences between both Lord Chelmsford and General Custer, and indeed the two battles, very different. Fundamentally, the Zulus planned their victory to a certain extent. My knowledge is Little Bighorn was a disaster very much of Custer's own making. He rode in there and totally had misread the situation and the strength of the enemy he was facing. Lord Chelmsford was going off trying to find the enemy who had sneaked round behind him and had planned an attack and then delivered a very coordinated and decisive attack on the British at Isandlwana. But anyway, interesting two disasters which probably had a lot to do with white man's arrogance, probably. But answers on the back of a postage card. QA Library, Chris, have I tried out my quiz question on anyone yet? No, I haven't. I'm going to keep it back. And I'm actually wondering whether we do maybe an end of year quiz here on YouTube. What do people think? A bit of a fun one, maybe in the run into Christmas, maybe in that lull between Christmas and New Year when we've all had enough of our families, had enough of eating and drinking too much. Maybe a fun history quiz could be a good one to do. I don't know, but I've got that one up my sleeve for you. Your question, QA Library. Easy Gamer, hello to you too. Oh, good morning. You're saying thank you very much. Jim Kirk, noon, made the live show. Well, especially as I didn't actually announce it. I just fancy doing one today. I was at a YouTube conference yesterday down in London. Really interesting, actually. Very, very thought-provoking. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a while. But Cambodia. We've got Cambodia here. Thank you very much. John, thank you for John Sadler, thank you for your comment. Vince, I think you're saying that sounds like a plan, and QA Library, that sounds like a good idea. I'm assuming you're talking about the quiz there. Duncan Kilburn, you wish the 30 Years' War was much more covered by historians. Yeah, do you know there's a whole series of those wars actually, Duncan, which I'd like to touch on, but I appreciate. I really have to get my head around that because most people know nothing about it, and you can dive down a bit too far into a lot of these things. A bit like the 100 Years' War as well, which I definitely will be doing in the near future here on YouTube. Okay, so breaking out a little bit from the classic 19th century Victorian stuff, only because there's a hell of a lot more British history we can talk about. Some fascinating stories, like the one I did last week, the Battle at Bossenden Wood. And that in itself is in a period in British history where we had things like the Peterloo Massacre. We had the Pentridge Rising in Nottinghamshire, well, it was actually Derbyshire, where they marched agricultural workers. It's mainly textile workers marched on Nottingham. Great story. I heard about that when I lived in Nottingham many years ago, and basically, it was a carry on revolution. these guys basically were all going to do a rising. They were going to march on Nottingham. They were told that there was risings happening all around Britain. Everyone was going to be marching on London. Actually, no, there was just a rising in Pentridge, and they marched on Nottingham. It was a bit like a pub crawl. Most of the revolutionaries were pissed as farts by the morning as they approached near Daybrook just north of Nottingham city centre, and the local yeomanry had been drawn up, sabres drawn, ready to meet them. And I won't tell you the rest because that'd be a spoiler, wouldn't it? But maybe I'll tell you that, do that video as well at some stage. I just noticed one there from David Kelsey. Love to hear my take on mythical characters of England, i.e. Merlin and Robin Hood. Never thought about Merlin, but Robin Hood, definitely. And within the Merlin thing, King Arthur as well, actually, for that matter. King Arthur, everyone's an expert on King Arthur. And everyone knows that King Arthur had something to do with their locality, supposedly. A little bit like Dick Turpin. Do you remember I did a video about Dick Turpin last year? Dick Turpin seems to have frequented every pub in England. I'm feeling he probably didn't. But again, when I lived in Nottingham, there was the Loggerheads pub just below the old city down by Broadmarsh. And that supposedly was a haunt of Dick Turpin. Nottingham has a good tie for next week in British history. So hopefully I'll do a live show next Friday as well and tell you a little bit about that. Joshua is saying hello from Canada. That's cool. And we've got a few more votes for a quiz. Thank you very much indeed. Vince has said, and you're tying in with these mythical characters. Dick Whittington. Yeah, I think Dick Whittington would be a really cool one, actually. And I have, all right, a history story that I'm just investigating. It has a link, quite a strong link, to the comedy great program, Only Fools and Horses. So I'll leave you with that one. But and if any of you can guess what it might on earth be, then put it in the chat. But I'm thinking it might be a long story. But I think history meets Only Fools and Horses could be a really cool one. Yeah, leave it at that. QA Library. Thomas Gonzalez, you're currently we are currently celebrating, that we Americans, not Brits, are celebrating 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War. Any thoughts on unique stories from this war? I want to tell some stories generally from the war, okay? But one of the new unique ones was the plot to kidnap the future King William IV of Great Britain. So when he was in New York. He wasn't king at the time, but supposedly the plot was sanctioned by George Washington. There we go. Sebastian Moran. No, you're not being rude at all, Sebastian. Could I list them? Yes, I can. It just requires me being a bit organised, doesn't it? So leave that one with me. They used to all be organised, actually, but as I keep adding new stories, the playlists go a bit out of order. So thank you very much for that one, mate. And I had noticed you've made a comment about it as well, so thank you. You love my presentation, says Nicola. Well, thank you very much indeed. Sarah Jane, Uncle Albert's naval career. Not as good a backstory as the characters in Dad's Army. Some of their backstories are really good, but it isn't Uncle Albert's naval career from Only Fools and Horses. Sebastian, my pleasure. Let's move on then. So 14th of October, 1066, the Battle of Hastings. Won't go into too much detail. I actually talked about it quite a lot in my Patrons live show on Monday, because this really brought to a head both a massive year of change in England. It was the third of three battles that were fought in England in 1066. All fought, two of them up in the north of England. Basically, England was being invaded on two different fronts. As you don't know, everyone knows about William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, William the First of England. What a lot of people don't realise is the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, also invaded England, invaded in Yorkshire, sailed across the North Sea to Yorkshire. He fancied having a go at conquering England in 1066 as well. He actually notched up a victory over the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. And then Harold defeated him at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just to the east of York, actually destroyed the Viking army. And then, of course, 3 days after his victory at Stamford Bridge, would you believe William of Normandy lands down on the south coast of England, and now he's got to take his absolutely knackered army all the way back down to London and then beyond to Sussex. And the Battle of Hastings was a hard-fought battle. It's quite unique in medieval terms because it actually lasted basically from about 9 o'clock in the morning right through to sunset. And those were physical battles, medieval battles. People don't realize that. Most medieval battles were actually quite short because physically they were really hard to fight. The Battle of Hastings lasted all day. And it was only as the shadows were starting to grow on the ground that William of Normandy basically, he thought the game was up. If Harold could survive till nightfall and retreat back to London, wait for more reinforcements from all over England, William, well, he had his invading army, and that was your lot. And it was a lot weaker than it was, at 9 o'clock that morning. So William basically ordered an all-out assault on the British lines, the English lines. And during that assault, at some stage, King Harold Godwinson is killed, possibly with an arrow to his eye, more likely ridden down by some of the Norman cavalry, some of the Norman knights. And of course, that was, game change for England eventually, not initially. Victory to the Normans. William wasn't offered the crown by the English. They tried to find an alternative candidate. But eventually, Christmas Day, 1066, William is crowned King of England. But even then, of course, the English didn't go quietly into the night, into Norman occupation. There were risings in the north, significant risings in the north of England, which led, of course, famously to William going up there and having a scorched earth policy to punish the north of England, called the Harrying of the North. Famously as well, there was Hereward the Wake with his rebellion, which was centred around the island of Ely in the Fenlands at the time in what's now Cambridgeshire. And indeed, there was a landing by some of Harold's sons from his common-law wife, Edith Swanneck. They'd gone to Ireland. They went to Dublin, which was a Viking settlement, and they recruited a mercenary army and tried to land in both North Somerset and North Devon, and were beaten off actually by English soldiers, now swearing loyalty to William the Conqueror. So anyway, there you go, the 1066. And I have to be honest, 1066, if any of you have watched recently the BBC programme, King and Conqueror, what a load of old tosh. I had to watch it just because it was like watching a car crash, really. It was, I don't know, if any of you have watched it, give me your views, okay? Because I'd love to know if I'm just whistling in the wind here like a grumpy old man, or whether a lot of you are thinking the same if you watch that programme. This didn't flag up on your YouTube, says James Beeching. Probably not, because I just came on and decided I was going to chunter away actually today, James. Did William ever have to put down a Viking invasion, says QA Library? Of a fashion, yes, there was a Viking invasion by Sweyn, the King of Denmark, who also had a claim to the English throne. And that would happen in 1068, 1069, 1068. So a couple of years after Hastings. He arrived in North. They didn't have as big an army, as far as I'm aware, as Harold Hardrada. And William didn't actually fight him. He just paid him off. It was actually an interesting one. It was a rising in the north by two of the earls, Morcar and Edwin, the ones who'd lost at Fulford Bridge against Harold Hardrada. The King of Scotland, Malcolm Canmore, Malcolm III invaded England. We had King Sweyn of Denmark rocking up. And we also had a member of the House of Wessex, actually, Royal House of Wessex, Edgar Atheling. That was the combined opposition in the north of England. And basically, William paid off the Danish king. He paid off the Scottish king, and that left the two earls and the young teenage member of the Royal House of Wessex, who all begged for forgiveness, basically. So, yeah, anyway, there you go. Trojan, I've just sorted your one. You said you enjoyed King and Conqueror as a drama. Yeah, as a drama, I think as a drama, it was fine. It historically definitely wasn't there. So, yeah. John Sadler, just seen your comment. Sarah Jane, never watched it. If you want me to be honest, Sarah Jane, don't bother. There's better things you can do with your life. Taking the dog for a walk, whatever, anything really. Easy Gamer says it was absolutely terrible. Yep, I'd agree with that one. They changed people's names, historical names in there as well. Historical titles. Morcar was the Earl. Ian was the Earl of Mercia. No, he wasn't. He was the Earl of Northumbria. It was his brother Edwin who was the Earl of Mercia. It was just a load of old honk, really. Sebastian, yeah. Thank you. Okay, fine, Sean. Another good one. Thank you. Hey, Bolivia. I've got Bolivia here. Thank you very much indeed. And John 9021 just said you're back from Gettysburg. Absolutely amazing. Would love to go to Gettysburg, actually. Alistair from Australia. Hello to you too. James Beeching says this is the thing that the BBC spent so much money on. They did. And one of the things that really bugs me, actually, with these sort of things, and they did do it in Last Kingdom as well, all right? And I like Last Kingdom as a series, just based on novels, really. But whenever England, if you watch these programs, England is full of like desolate moorlands that look sort of like the Scottish Highlands in these programs. Actually, of course, England at the time was covered in forests. Which is one of the reasons, of course, it's very hard to keep track of an invading Viking army because they disappear into a forest and you didn't have a blinking clue where they've gone. So there we go. Anyway, right. Worksop in Nottinghamshire. Lovely. Ages since I've been to Worksop. Used to do some business in Retford as well when I worked for Boots, but there you go, long time ago. Would I do an episode on the original Battle of Vinegar Hill? You mean Vinegar Hill in Ireland? Yes, I will at some stage, actually. The interesting thing is, Irish history. I did one about the Battle of the Boyne. It's the only thing I've done over in Ireland. You have to sometimes tread a little bit sensitively with Irish history, all right, as an Englishman, I think. But one of the things that I was talking to someone last night, actually, that I met, is that, and he's married to an Irish woman, is that basically most English people know absolutely diddly squat of Irish history, of any fashion, apart from the IRA. And they've probably heard of the Easter Rising, and not a lot else. So I think there's loads that we could explore with Irish history. Just got to have someone teaching me all the Gaelic names, because let's face it, I get most English names wrong, let alone Gaelic ones. Right. Anyway, let's pile on. 14th of October, 1899, the siege of Mafeking and Kimberley began during the Anglo-Boer War. If you interesting one, most people see the Boer War as British aggression against the Boers, which it sort of was, but the actual war itself was the British not complying with an ultimatum from the Boer republics to withdraw troops from the border. And so the Boers actually invaded British territory. Just one of those little semantics in history, not trying to get the British Empire off the hook at all in the Boer War, but it's just a little interesting one. And the ultimatum, by the way, had been written up by the Attorney General of the Transvaal, the South African Republic, a young budding lawyer by the name of Jan Smuts. Anyway, so the Boers came across the border and on the 14th of October besieged Mafeking and Kimberley, and Boer War is on. 14th of October 1913, the Caerphilly pit disaster. Get my words out there. 439 men died in Britain's worst ever colliery disaster. In the morning of the 14th of October 1913, 950 men went down into the mine on their shift. There was a massive explosion. And of those 950 men, 439 died, nearly half. The force of the explosion was so great. Okay, just imagine this from a mine. It was so great that it pushed the cage lifts all the way back up the shafts. And they actually, with the force, they actually smashed into the landing gears. They got impaled on the landing gears, the big wheels that we associate with coal mining. Okay, that was the force of the blast down underground. The sad bit was there was an inquiry afterwards, and the mine owners were basically let off the hook. There was obviously they were not just from a health and safety angle, but they were forced to pay compensation to the families of those men who'd been down there. The compensation was £24, not £24 per lost person. All right, £24 in total. between or for 439 men who died. So there we go. The 14th of October 1913, Britain's worst ever colliery disaster at Caerphilly. Just a quick one there. Have I done the Soham Rail tragedy of 1944, says John Sadler? No. I tell you, John, there are so many blinking stories from British history, right? I need lots and lots of stuff. James Beeching, yeah, I totally agree with you, mate. James, when did the Boers officially end slavery in their republics? I couldn't tell you that one off the top of my head. Don't forget, it was one of the causes as to why the Boers had left British-controlled Cape Colony in the first place. Not sure when they certainly didn't have slavery by 1899, but interestingly, there had been a report about Boer treatment of blacks in their two republics just before the Boer War, seized on by the British as a look, the Boers, look how awful they are to their blacks, like the British were so blinking brilliant at the time. Read some of the accounts of what happened up in Rhodesia during the 1896 rebellion. But this particular report that absolutely castigated the Boer treatment, and the Boers basically said, oh, it's an imperialist bit of propaganda, was written by Roger Casement of Easter Rising fame. So a man who basically castigated the Boers would 20 years later be sentenced to death by the British during the Easter Rising. Which brings us right back to our Irish history, which I said we weren't going to be doing. Well, I need to talk about in more detail at some stage. Radio. And Charles Presley says you would. Charles Presley says English Civil War. You know very little about. Yeah. Oh, Devet, thank you very much indeed. Boers never had slaves in the way you think of slaves. Fine. Happy with that one. Okay, thank you very much. By the way, just on slaves, did you know the Anglo-Saxons had slaves, and that Bristol, well known as a slaving port in the transatlantic slave trade, actually grew up as a slave trading town in Anglo-Saxon England, sending Anglo-Saxon slaves off to Ireland to be traded at Dublin, the Viking settlement there. Anyway, there you go. Right. Where are we? 14th of October, still. 1939, HMS Royal Oak was torpedoed at Scapa Flow. U-boat U-47 sent several torpedoes into the Royal Oak while many of the crew were asleep, and 834 men drowned or were killed with the sinking of the HMS Royal Oak at Scapa Flow. So there we go. James, the Normans actually ended slave trade in England. Yes, they did. You see, it's not all bad news having William the Conqueror here. And actually, for a lot of the peasantry in England, it really wasn't a major change. For the very bottom group, it was, because they were no longer slaves. But the big change in England was the aristocracy, the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, many of whom, of course, had been killed at Hastings. But that was where the big change came, and it was a change of land ownership as much as anything that changed in England. For the peasants, they just changed Anglo-Saxon lord for a Norman lord. So there we go. Merlin says, do I know the case of Lundy, the history of Lundy Island? Not particularly, but I do know Lundy Island was occupied by the Barbary pirates. I always found that's quite ironic. The Barbary pirates were obviously pirates, but they also captured white people to take to the slave markets in North Africa. Captured white people famously, they stormed ashore at Baltimore in Southern Ireland, and indeed in Cornwall as well, also abducting crews off ships. But there's irony that they were in Lundy, abducting white crews off merchant ships and things, and coming up and down the Bristol Channel past them with ships going out from Bristol to the transatlantic slave trade. I think history's got some wonderful twists and turns, hasn't it? Right, let me go on for you. So what have we got? 16th of October, 1803, the birth of Robert Stephenson, great engineer. And I think, again, someone was talking about different bits of history we could cover. I think some of the British engineering feats, some of the British scientists, as well as explorers, by the way, are stories that people forget and don't get taught in schools very much nowadays. So not just Stephenson, but people like Brunel, some of the great explorers as well. like Richard Burton, not the actor, David Livingstone, of course. Yeah, there are some great stories out there to tell. 16th of October, 1834, the Houses of Parliament burned down. Mentioned this on my Patron show on Monday, but this was the original Houses of Parliament, the medieval Houses of Parliament, the Houses of Parliament that Guy Fawkes was going to try and blow up. Finally, 200 years after Guy Fawkes had been trying to blow it up, it burns down of its own accord. One of the real sad bits was that they had all the medieval records were housed in there, and most of the medieval records were lost in the fire. So, apart from a historic monument, the actual the stories, the evidence from medieval history and into Tudor and Stuart history was all lost in the Great Fire of the destruction of the Houses of Parliament, which resulted in the current Houses of Parliament that we all know and photograph with with the tower which houses Big Ben in it. It was built after that. His dad, James, you can all read his comment. All right. Where have we got? Oh, 16th of October, 1915, First World War. Britain declares war on Bulgaria. This is one of those little remembered parts of the First World War, and certainly with the Brits, because I know I've talked about this on here before. Brits have got this real fixation with Flanders Fields. We don't even really acknowledge the U-boat war around the coast of Britain, do we? It was Flanders Fields, and we hear from our Australian and New Zealand friends there was Gallipoli and a bit of Beersheba. Some of the Indian people I know will very quickly say, "Oh yeah," and there was Mesopotamia as well. A few South Africans, Devet, you'd be like, Devet would be saying, "Oh yeah," and there was East Africa as well. Jan Smuts was there as well. But people forget, actually, that Britain were fighting the Bulgarians. Bulgaria came into the war on the side of the Germans and the Austrians and the Ottomans. So they were the last of the four powers to join the Axis powers. And they principally joined in to finally finish off Serbia. And those of you who know your First World War, it was the whole thing, a Serbian nationalist shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Austria saw that, apart from being an affront, also an opportunity to flex their muscles and deal with Serbia once and for all. And militarily, a complete disaster. The Austrian army really proved that they really were, pretty much hopeless. And the Serbians put up an incredible resistance. And eventually, the Bulgarians were enticed to join in the war, to have some territory at Serbia's expense and to finish Serbia off. Britain obviously came in on the side of Serbia, and Britain declared war on Bulgaria in 1915. They rushed troops to try and save Serbia. They didn't. Serbia actually finally fell. A huge exodus through the mountain passes in the winter from Serbia by the Serbian army, sort of almost like a heroic retreat, which most people don't know about, certainly not in Britain. But they established a front in basically what's now northern Greece, running from sort of Albania on the Adriatic across to Thessalonica sort of area in modern day Greece. It's called the Salonika Front, and in that war from 1915 to 1918. 26,000 British troops died on the Salonika front. No one remembers it in Britain. 200,000 Bulgarians were also killed, but on the Allied side, 26,000 Brits, 40,000 Russians, 6,000 French, 10,000 Italians, 27,000 Greeks. 83, where are we? 100. So basically, 110,000 Allied troops, 200,000 Bulgarians died on the Salonika front. Unknown number of Germans. Not many were there, but haven't got figures on them. So maybe I've had people request me to do a talk about the Salonika front. Don't know what you think, because I just think some of those long lost areas of the First World War, which aren't the Battle of the Somme or Ypres, all the things that we tend to talk about in Britain, would be really interesting. Yeah, James Beeching, you're absolutely right. Rupert Brooke died in the Balkans. Yeah. He didn't die in the Balkans. He actually died Rupert Brooke died on a Greek island, but yeah, because he was he'd been injured. Yeah. John Sadler, some interesting stuff there. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, you're talking about the Hood. That's another interesting ship. Yeah, okay. James Beeching, lots of other fronts in World War One. Yeah, absolutely. You know, the whole thing, even in the Far East, of course. You know, the attack on the German treaty port of Tsingtao, mainly by the Japanese, but with the British in attendance. We played a secondary role in that one. Thanks, Lurie. I will check. Thank you very much indeed. Right. So where are we at? Let's keep rocking on then. So 16th of October 1953, Winston Churchill is announced as winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, mainly for his series of books on the histories of the English-speaking peoples, but also for his research and book on the Duke of Marlborough, of course, was one of his ancestors. So he got the Nobel Prize for Literature. So back in 1953. There you go. 17th of October, 1091, back into William the Conqueror's time, actually. The Great London Tornado. The Great London Tornado. A wind whipped through London. It was recorded by William of Malmesbury. Something like 600 houses in London were destroyed. London Bridge was actually destroyed. It was a wooden bridge at the time, being rebuilt by William the Conqueror, but that was destroyed as well. And experts have looked at the damage, or the reports of damage, from people like William of Malmesbury, and meteorologists have tried to work back a model how strong the winds probably were. And it's generally believed that the winds were somewhere in the region of 160 miles an hour, which makes it one of the strongest storms or winds, or tornadoes, sorry, to have ever hit England. So there you are, the Great London Tornado of 1091. I bet you didn't know about that one. So you can roll that one out to your friends and family over the weekend. The 17th of October, 1173, the Battle of Fornham St. Genevieve in East Anglia. This was during the reign of Henry II, and this was actually a rising. Henry II had a, let's call it the Plantagenets. They were a dysfunctional family. I mean, we all end up at the Wars of the Roses. But way back, founding father, Henry Plantagenet, Henry II, basically had an absolute, I was going to say love-hate relationship with his sons. I think it was more hate than love. But, his sons were in constant rebellion against him. And I don't mean just not talking to him or sending him, not bothering to send him Christmas cards and things. I mean, actually rising in rebellion. And this was one of those occasions. Actually, the Battle of Fornham St. Genevieve was actually a battle between Baron supporters of his sons and Baron supporters of Henry II, but a sort of very long lost battle in England. But maybe, again, another fascinating thing we should investigate at some other time. And just staying in medieval England, it's medieval England and Scotland, actually, because 17th of October, 1346, the Battle of Neville's Cross, up near County Durham, near Durham. The Battle of Neville's Cross, a battle between the English and the Scots, Scottish invasion of England that is defeated up in the northeast, up at, as I say, the Battle of Neville's Cross, 17th of October, 1346. For my American viewers, 17th of October, 1777, the Battle of Saratoga. Anyway, moving on swiftly. And the 17th of October, 1814, the London beer flood. 2.5 million pints of porter beer burst out. There was a brewery in London, just on Tottenham Court Road. Those of you who know London. In fact, actually, if you know London, where the Dominion Theatre now is, there was a brewery there called the Three Horseshoes Brewery. Sorry, the Horseshoe Brewery, beg pardon. And they had huge vats of porter beer being brewed. And one of these vats, they had massive ones. It was 22-foot high vats of beer. 22-foot high vat of porter beer exploded, and on the 17th of October, about 4:30 in the afternoon, and it exploded, and basically it set off a chain reaction with all the other large vats of beer next to it, like a chain of dominoes, but with deadly results. The beer came pouring out, a 15-foot wall of beer and bricks, because it just took out the walls of the brewery, or one of the side walls, swept in to the slum area that was just behind Tottenham Court Road at the time. About 2.5 million pints of beer. And a lot of people at this time in the slums lived in the basements of buildings, which were flooded. And I don't just mean flooded up to your knees, I mean flooded. 8 people were drowned in the cellars. 8 people in the, when you think your life's crap and you're living in a slum, it just got a bit worse when you got, drowned in beer. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but probably not for those people. The stench of the beer lasted for months in that part of London. brewery was rebuilt or repaired, went on till the 1920s when it was knocked down, and the current Dominion Theatre was built there. So there we go, bit of London, bit of Theatreland history there for you, but with a sad note, a sad point as well. 17th of October, 1937, James Bruce Ismay died. Those of you who know James Bruce Ismay, he was the chairman of the White Star Line. Famously, he was on the Titanic, his flagship, on the night it hit the iceberg, and of course, rather controversially, he managed to get himself into a lifeboat, and he never really lived down the stigma of surviving the Titanic in a time when it should have been women and children first. And of course, so many women and children, women in particular, from steerage never made it. How some of the male men from first class managed to get themselves into lifeboats. But anyway, an interesting character, and as I say, he lived with the stigma for over 25 years. Pretty long time to live with the stigma, isn't it? 18th of October, Saturday. So those are events for today, aren't they? 17th of October, those ones. 18th of October, 1016, the Battle of Bossenden, fought in Essex, between Edmund Ironside, the son of Ethelred the Unready, and King Canute of Denmark. Basically, it was actually a Danish victory, a Danish invading army. And again, we talked about this in the Patrons, the Patrons live show on Monday. Anyone, by the way, who's interested in the Patrons live, being a patron, just pop over to thehistorychap.com and you'll see options to do that. I do a live show almost every Monday, unless there's like bank holidays or something. Okay, and we delve into these sort of stories in a hell of a lot more detail. So this week we had Battle of Hastings, we did Bossenden, and actually we did the Beer Flood, but in more detail. But anyway, so Battle of Bossenden, Danish invasion of England, and basically it was Ethelred the Unready finally had died, and his son Edmund Ironside had been proclaimed king, or at least been proclaimed king by some of England. Others thought the game was already up and had proclaimed King Canute as King of England. They actually, at the end of the Battle of Bossenden, it was one of 5 battles they fought. The two men fought in 1016 through the summer and into the autumn of 1016. They agreed to divide England in two. Edmund Ironside would have London and everything south of the Thames, the old historic Wessex, and Canute would have the rest. As it was, a few weeks later, Edmund Ironside went to London, his sort of main base, and there he died in mysterious circumstances. Some people believe he was assassinated while sitting on a privy, which is an interesting way to die, isn't it? Interesting, of course. Well, those of you who are or remember Game of Thrones, that happened in Game of Thrones as well. Someone being killed, assassinated on the privy. So the Battle of Bossenden, and basically after that, King Canute becomes king of the whole of England and rules it for the best part of 20 years. 18th of October, 1918, Theodore Hardy, VC, was killed in action. Theodore Hardy, the most decorated chaplain in the British Army in the First World War. Fascinating man. And yes, and I've done a video about him actually. So if you're interested in Theodore Hardy VC, check it out. Theodore Hardy, fascinating, as I say, great one there. And last but not least, 18th of October, 1922, just after the First World War finished, the BBC was established, the British Broadcasting Association, to give it its full title. British Broadcasting Company, sorry, to give it its full title, BBC. So there we are. So hopefully you've enjoyed that little roundup of British history this week. Quite a lot happened, wasn't there? Next week, we've got some really good stuff as well. Next week's a week of battles and disasters, actually. And of course, hopefully you just maybe got a taste for, whilst I do all the stuff, which tends to be very Victorian, doesn't it? You know, Boer War and Zulus and all that malarkey. Just gone and done Alamo, Bossenden Wood. There are just so many stories from British history that I would like to tell. I would like to start going back and exploring some of that stuff in the Civil War, the American Revolutionary Wars, and the Middle Ages, medieval times as well, including 1066 and some of the Anglo-Saxon stuff. So I just think there's so many battles we can tell, and that's before we bother worrying about, as I said earlier, some of our explorers and engineers and people like that, some of the great events that have happened in British history. I think one about the Great Exhibition would be a fantastic one as well. Great story, I should think. Righty ho. And some people are saying, what do I got here? Devet's saying, please make a video about Daniel Theron. Okay. Don't know about Daniel Theron. Sorry. I'll look him up in a while. Vince has said you're saying the Imperial War Museum is closing its VC gallery, handing them back to owners like Lord Ashcroft. Vince, I think all the VCs are Lord Ashcroft's at the Imperial War Museum. That the main display. I think they might own a few of their own, but the main display about the VCs was Lord Ashcroft's, and he did loan it to them for a period of time. That period of time is running out, and they've decided. And I don't know how much Lord Ashcroft had to do with this, but they've decided as Imperial War Museum that's they're not going to renew it. A lot of people are upset about that, but there you go. Wait, Jim Newman, I'm glad it's your last day of your vacation, so thank you very much indeed. Harry, you said you'd love to hear about the British observers during the US Civil War. Do you know, that thought has occurred to me. Garnet Wolseley being one of them, of course, but one of Devet, thank you very much for clarifying just there. Right. Video of the siege of Gibraltar would be cool. Oh, yeah, that would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, like that one. Like that one. Watch this space. Cavalier, as well this week, the British triumphed at Queenstown Heights. Did mention Queenstown Heights actually earlier. You might not have been on the show, or you might have thought might have been painting your nails or something. But where were we? Yeah, 13th of October, 1812. Queenstown Heights. There we are. Rightio, folks. So there we go. A week in British history. Don't forget, if you haven't watched it already, the British and Irish at the Alamo. Fascinating story. I found it fascinating to research. And of course, if you haven't seen last week's one, the Battle of Bossenden Wood, another fascinating story from British history, that in Queen Victoria's long reign, where the British Army were in action almost every year during her reign, somewhere in the world. Would you believe the very first officer died in action in Kent? That's the story of the Battle of Bossenden Wood. So if you haven't seen it, have a look for that one as well. So in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I did say I'll tell you about the YouTube conference I went to yesterday. Yeah, it was good. Won't go into much detail. I thought it was called Impact, and it was talking fundamentally about how does YouTube engage with younger people. Obviously not just in history. This was everything. There was drug abuse and crime and all sorts of stuff. As I say, very, very interesting, very, very thought-provoking. I have a few thought-provoking thoughts of my own. Joe Wicks wasn't there, but his brother Nicky Wicks was speaking on stage. That was very interesting as well. Yeah, so anyway, there is this thing, because let's be honest, most of you guys, I'm guessing, are probably over the age of 40, if my YouTube analytics tell me the truth. And there's this massive gap of young people, and those of you in Britain might know that, you've got horrible histories for primary school kids and really nothing. And I know loads of you say, they don't teach this in British schools. Trust me, back when I was in schools in the 70s, 80s, they didn't teach most of the stuff that I've been talking about here either. There's only a finite amount of things as a history teacher you can cover, even if the national curriculum is allowing you to cover all that stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting way. And the long chats that I do like this probably don't appeal to 14-year-olds or 20-year-olds. And probably my videos don't either, for that matter. They're probably too long, too detailed, too boring. No animated people in there. It's interesting. There is a, and then we all talk about young people don't know about modern history. I'm guessing people like me aren't actually engaging them in the space and in the way that they actually would learn. But there you go, because they find it fascinating. When I talk to my sons and his friends, it's like, oh wow, that's really interesting. But I can't go around the world talking, one group of people at a time. So I wonder how you do that on YouTube. It might not even be for me, but it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I thank all of you guys for watching my programs, and I thank all of you who, do throw some money in the pot as well. Really appreciate that as well, whether it's as patrons or supporting here on YouTube. Thank you very much indeed. But just actually making this dream come true for me of being telling great history stories from a country's history that I just find absolutely fascinating. We don't need to make up the stories. They're there anyway. And I just love sharing my knowledge and my passion with like-minded people. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to go and grab some lunch now, and have a fantastic weekend, won't you? Speak to you all very soon. Take care. See you soon.